There's something different about the Appalachian woods. The silence isn't just quiet, it listens. The trees don't just sway, they watch. And when the fire goes out at night, you don't just feel cold, you feel observed. Tonight, I've gathered 10 of the most disturbing, true camping horror stories, each one pulled from real encounters deep in the hollows, ridgelines, and forgotten trails of Appalachia. If you've ever zipped your tent shut and prayed nothing was outside, these are for you. Hit that like button if you believe more people should hear these stories. Your like helps spread the fear to other horror lovers. Comment where you're watching from. Every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's listening in from. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support keeps creepy souls alive and the stories coming. Now, grab your lantern, let's begin. I grew up in West Virginia, so camping in the Appalachians wasn't unusual for me. But that trip, 3 summers ago, was the last time I ever set foot in those mountains. It was me, Clay, and Riley. We'd been friends since high school, and every year we'd pick a new spot to camp. That year, Clay found a place online, an old fire lookout tower near the edge of Monongahela National Forest. He said the view from the top was unbelievable, miles of foggy ridgelines and pines stretching in every direction. The photos looked eerie, sure, but we all liked that kind of thing. We drove up a winding dirt road that turned into little more than a muddy path. The forest around us felt ancient, thick and quiet. The air smelled like wet leaves and iron. By the time we reached the clearing, it was late afternoon. The tower stood at the center like some forgotten relic. Rust streaked its legs, and its steps were covered in brown moss. The cab at the top still had glass windows, though some were cracked or missing. Beside it, a small concrete pad marked where the ranger's cabin must have been decades ago, just a square of rotted foundation now. We set up camp about 50 feet from the base of the tower. The air had that kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. Even the birds went quiet when the wind shifted. That first night, after we cooked dinner and shared a few beers, we lay in our tents listening to the forest breathe. Around midnight, I started hearing it, metal creaking softly, followed by slow, measured clangs. It sounded like someone climbing the steps of the tower. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a raccoon or even the wind moving something loose. But the sounds were deliberate. Step, step, pause, step. I unzipped my tent halfway and shined my flashlight toward the tower. The beam caught the lower half of the staircase. Empty. Clay's light flicked on from his tent, sweeping across the same direction. "See anything?" he whispered. I didn't, but the steps had stopped. We waited in silence for a long time. Eventually, the forest went still again, and we all went back to sleep, pretending it was nothing. The next morning, we laughed it off. Riley joked that maybe the old ranger who used to work here still did his rounds, but he didn't sound like he was joking. That night, it happened again. Around 1 in the morning, the sound started faint, like something brushing metal far above us. Then came the slow rhythm. Step, step, step. I lay there, frozen, staring up through the mesh of my tent at the black silhouette of the tower. When I aimed my light this time, I swore I saw movement. A brief glint like someone shifting out of view near the top. But when Clay climbed halfway up to check, there was no one. Just the wind pushing through the pines and the rust smell of wet iron. We didn't talk much after that. Clay didn't finish his climb. He came down pale and quiet. I remember him saying softly, "It smells like mud up there." By the third night, we were all exhausted. None of us wanted to admit how uneasy we felt. We decided to leave in the morning. But around 3 a.m., I woke to a sound so close it made my skin crawl. Soft footsteps squelching in mud, right outside the tent. Then Clay's whisper, "Don't move." I held my breath as a beam of his flashlight cut across the fabric of my tent. I could see his shadow crouched low, facing something on the ground. When I finally looked, he was tracing something in the dirt. Muddy boot prints. They led straight to our tent, then circled it. Once, twice, and then stopped, right behind where I was lying. Clay's light trembled as he followed the tracks with his hand. "They weren't here an hour ago," he said quietly. "Someone's been walking around us." That was the moment I realized none of us were sleeping again that night. We didn't pack up right away. It sounds stupid now, but none of us wanted to go running through the woods in the dark. The nearest road was 5 miles downhill, and our only light came from 2 weak flashlights and a lantern. So we sat together in silence, backs against a log, the tower looming above us. The fog had rolled in thick, making the world feel small and closed. Every so often we'd hear something shifting in the trees, a drip, a twig breaking, but nothing that sounded human. When the first light of dawn came, the forest looked dead. Everything was damp and pale, and the tower's metal shone slick with rain. That's when Riley noticed something. "There's more prints," he said. We followed them. Same muddy boots, same wide stride, leading away from our camp, down the slope behind the tower. The path curved toward the old concrete pad where the ranger's cabin used to stand. In the mud, near the edge of that foundation, we found where the prints stopped. Whoever it was had stood there for a long time. The ground was churned and heavy, and there, half buried under wet leaves, was an old, rusted coffee can. Inside were cigarette butts, all waterlogged and fresh. Someone had been staying out here, watching. We didn't say a word after that. We just tore down the tents, packed fast, and started back toward the truck. But the forest felt wrong. The fog was thicker now, almost metallic tasting. At some point, I realized we weren't following the same trail we'd come in on. The trees looked familiar, but every direction felt the same. Clay kept swearing under his breath. "We came this way," he said, pointing to a broken branch. "I marked this." But when we got there, the break was clean, fresh. It was like someone had followed behind us, moving our signs. We finally stumbled out onto the road near noon. I don't remember the drive home, just the silence. 2 days later, Clay texted me a picture. It was from his phone's gallery, something he'd taken the first night right before we went to sleep. A shot of the tower silhouetted against the stars, only, zoomed in, you could see it. A shape halfway up the stairs, human, still, just standing there. None of us had seen it when he took the picture. After that, I stopped answering Clay's messages. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that metal clang in my head. A month later, I heard from Riley's sister that he'd gone back up there. Said he needed to see something for himself. He never came home. The sheriff's office said his truck was found parked by the trailhead. They searched for a week, but all they found was his camp stove near the tower's base, and one muddy boot print pressed into the concrete. They never found the other one. Now, years later, I still wake up sometimes to that sound, the slow, rhythmic clang of metal steps. And when I do, I can't help but think of those boot prints circling our tent. How whoever made them had to be standing there for a long time, listening. When I was 21, I spent a week camping with my Uncle Ray along Blackwater Creek, a place that barely shows up on maps anymore. He used to take me there when I was a kid, long before the road washed out and the bridge collapsed. I remember how he'd always say, "This land don't forget, boy, it just hides things." That week, he wanted to show me where an old mining town once stood, a cluster of shacks and a single church that, according to him, slid into the creek after a flood sometime in the 30s. Most folks around those parts just called it Hallow Bend. The mines closed, the families left, and the forest grew back over everything. We parked his truck where the gravel ended and hiked the rest of the way in. The trees leaned tight over the path, branches slick with rain, and the smell of mud and rot hung heavy. It had rained the whole drive up, and the creek was swollen, churning brown water through the stones. We set camp near the water line, just under a ridge where the forest opened into a kind of clearing. There were traces of foundations, stone outlines, rusted iron nails, a warped horseshoe half buried in moss. It was strange how quiet it was. No birds, no bugs, just the constant roll of the creek. That first evening, we cooked beans and drank coffee while the mist rose from the water. Uncle Ray told me he once found a cracked church bell down here when he was young. Said it was just sitting in the dirt like the flood had spat it out. I asked if it was still there. He looked toward the creek, squinting through the fog. Maybe, he said after a while. Some things come back when they shouldn't. He had a way of saying things that made you feel like he wasn't talking about objects. When night came, the air got colder than I expected. I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut, the nylon sticking from dampness. The creek sounded closer in the dark, almost like it was moving around us. I could hear Uncle Ray shifting in his tent a few feet away, muttering something before falling quiet. At some point, I woke up to a faint sound, like someone whispering outside. At first, I thought it was Ray, maybe praying or talking in his sleep, but the voice was deeper, slower. The words came in fragments, soft and rhythmic, like an old man reciting scripture. It wasn't coming from my uncle's tent, it was right outside mine. I held my breath, listening. The voice carried through the fabric, cracked and wet, something about ashes and mercy. I wanted to call out, but couldn't make my mouth move. After a minute, the whispering stopped. The creek roared again. The woods went still. When I finally unzipped the tent and peeked out, the fog had thickened. My flashlight caught nothing but gray mist and wet brush. Then something glinted near the water. A curve of metal half buried in the mud. I walked closer, my boots sinking into the soft ground. It was a church bell, heavy and cold, tilted on its side like it had been there for years. But it wasn't rusted. It wasn't even dirty. The surface gleamed faintly under my light, polished, like someone had just scrubbed it clean. I crouched down, and the faint smell of oil and iron filled my nose. Inside the bell, carved into the metal, were a few shallow letters, HBC, Hallow Bend Church. When I looked back toward our tents, I thought I saw a movement, a shadow by the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, the fog had thinned, but the ground was slick with dew. Uncle Ray looked rough, eyes sunken, skin pale. I told him what I'd heard, and about the bell. He didn't say much at first, just stared at the creek, hands trembling around his tin mug. "You sure you didn't dream it?" he finally asked. "It was polished," I said, "shiny, like it was new." He nodded slowly, like that was the answer he expected. Then he said, "Pack up after breakfast. We're leaving." That didn't sound like him. Ray was the kind of man who'd camp through a thunderstorm just to prove he could. But I didn't argue. Still, before we left, I wanted to look at the bell again. I followed the bank, but the spot where I'd seen it was just smooth mud and running water. No bell, no marks, not even the prints from my boots. I felt a strange relief, like I'd imagined the whole thing. We started the hike back toward the truck. The woods were heavy with moisture and every step seemed to echo. About halfway up the trail, I noticed something off. Faint depressions in the mud ahead of us, too deep to be animal. They looked like boot prints, but they were turned backward, like someone had been walking away from the creek, facing toward it the whole time. Uncle Ray didn't stop to look. He just kept moving faster, muttering under his breath. When we reached the truck, I noticed his hands shaking again. Before I could ask, he turned to me and said, "Don't talk about what you saw. Not to me, not to anyone. Some things are better left down there." We drove home mostly in silence. He didn't take me camping after that. A few months later, Ray died of a heart attack in his sleep. He was only 59. At the funeral, one of his old friends, a miner from back in the day, pulled me aside. He asked if Ray ever told me about the bellman. I told him no. He said that back when the mine was still running, a preacher used to bless the shifts each morning by ringing a bell from the church on the hill. Then one day, there was a collapse. Dozens of men were trapped inside. The preacher stayed by the entrance, ringing that bell and praying until the hillside gave way and buried him too. When they dug the bodies out, they found the bell cracked clean through. The preacher's hands were still clutching the rope. The miner spat into the dirt and said, "Folks say the creek moved over that ground later on. Some nights you can still hear the prayers if you camp too close." I didn't tell him what I'd heard. A year later, I went back. I told myself it was to honor my uncle, but part of me just wanted proof. Something tangible, something real. The forest looked the same, wet, quiet, half-rotted. When I reached the clearing, the water was lower, the stones exposed. That's when I saw it again, the curve of metal in the mud, glinting faintly through the drizzle. The same bell. This time, I didn't touch it. I just stood there, watching the way it caught the light. The air smelled like rain and iron, and faintly, under the sound of the creek, I thought I heard someone whispering. Slow, broken words carried through the mist. I listened for a long time before turning back toward the trail. I haven't gone camping since. But sometimes when it rains at night, I still hear that same low voice through my window, whispering from somewhere far off, steady and calm, like a man still praying under the weight of the earth. I've always gone into the mountains alone. I tell myself it's for the peace, the quiet, the photos. But if I'm honest, it's because solitude calms something in me that city noise never could. That weekend in late September, I drove the Blue Ridge Parkway with a camera bag, a tent, and the promise of a clear sky. I stopped near milepost 312, a pull-off where the road curved into a hollow. The trees were already bleeding color, deep rust and gold, and mist hung low between the ridges. The air smelled of wet pine and old leaves. I parked my truck on a patch of flattened grass beside a trail that led maybe 50 yards down to a clearing. Perfect for camping. By sundown, fog rolled up from the valley like smoke, and everything went still except for the occasional drip of condensation from the branches. My fire popped weakly, the sound dampened by the thickness of the air. I cooked a small meal, took some long exposure shots of the horizon, and watched the blue fade to black. The silence was heavy, but not unusual for the mountains. You stop hearing the hum of traffic, the buzz of electricity, and then every sound that does come through feels personal, directed. A twig snapping, something shifting in the underbrush. I tried to ignore it, assuming it was deer. Around midnight, I crawled into my sleeping bag and turned off my lantern. The fire had burned down to faint orange veins, and the woods had gone completely dark, so dark I could barely see the shape of my own hand. I must have drifted for an hour or so before I heard it. A soft humming. It was faint at first, like wind through branches, then clearer, notes rising and falling with eerie patience. A woman's voice, slow and tired, humming something that might have been a lullaby. I froze. The sound came from the tree line, maybe 20 or 30 feet away. I waited for it to stop, but it didn't. It kept going, low, steady, like someone trying to comfort a child. The melody looped, then faltered, then started again, just slightly off-pitch the second time. I didn't move. My first thought was that maybe someone else had camped nearby, but I'd seen no other cars when I arrived, and the nearest town was miles down a twisting road. The humming lasted maybe 2 minutes, then faded into the night. When it stopped, I realized how loud my heartbeat had become. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the dark fabric of my tent. At first light, I packed everything in silence. The grass around my tent was slick with dew, and the ground was soft with prints, mostly my own, though I noticed a patch of flattened leaves leading toward the woods. No footprints, just a disturbed line through the undergrowth, as if someone had walked slowly, dragging something behind them. I didn't take more photos. I just left. By the time I reached the parkway again, the morning fog was burning off, and sunlight broke through the trees like nothing had happened. But as I drove away, I caught myself humming just a few bars of that same slow tune before I realized I had no memory of how it went. It just slipped from somewhere in me. Back home in Asheville, I told myself it was exhaustion. Sleep deprivation can make you hear things, fill in the silence with patterns your brain invents. But that night, when I plugged in my camera and scrolled through the photos, something felt wrong. Every shot from after midnight was slightly blurred. Not motion blurred, but hazy, as if a thin film of fog had crept across the lens. In the corners of a few frames, faint shapes glowed against the tree line. Not figures, just smudges of pale gray, like breath on glass. I closed my laptop. I didn't sleep well for the next few nights. Every time I started to drift, I'd hear that melody again, faint and unfinished, right before my thoughts dissolved. A week later, it started bothering me enough that I tried to look it up. I searched old Appalachian lullabies, mountain songs, funeral hymns. Most of what I found were scratchy recordings and handwritten lyrics archived by folk historians. But then, I stumbled on a 1904 cylinder recording labeled Appalachian Funeral Song, Little Sleep, My Child. I pressed play. The first few seconds were static, then came a woman's voice, soft and unsteady, humming the exact same tune I'd heard in those woods. Every note, every fragile breath between the phrases. My throat went dry. I paused it halfway through and replayed the section where the pitch dipped slightly, that same small imperfection I remembered hearing outside my tent. It wasn't similar, it was identical. The description below the recording said the collector had found the song in a small settlement that no longer existed, a place called White Hollow, abandoned in the early 1900s after a flood. Supposedly, the singer had been a mother who lost her child and kept visiting the flooded graveyard to sing until she herself passed away. That night, I deleted the file from my computer, but I couldn't stop thinking about the voice. How fragile it had sounded, how close. The next morning, I noticed something else. My tent, which I'd left folded in the truck bed since the trip, smelled faintly of rot and river mud. I brushed it off as mildew, but when I shook it out on the driveway, a few strands of long, dark hair clung to the inside fabric. They weren't mine. I threw it away that afternoon. It's been 3 months since then. Sometimes, when I drive the parkway, I still glance at the pull-offs, wondering if I could find that exact spot again. But every time I reach that part of the road, the GPS glitches for a second, The mile markers blur in my memory, and I can never tell if I've already passed it. At night, I'll still catch myself humming. Always the same slow pattern, soft and tired, like someone trying to put something to rest. And the strangest part? The more I try to remember, the woman's voice, the one on the recording, the more it sounds like my own. I've hiked a lot of places in my life, but the Appalachian backcountry is something else entirely. It feels alive, like the forest itself is always listening. You don't notice it right away, not when the sun's still up. It's only when the mist rolls in at dusk, when the trees start to whisper in the wind, that you realize how far you are from anyone who could help you. Catherine and I had been dating for about a year when we decided to spend a weekend hiking through the southern stretch of the Blue Ridge. We weren't experienced campers, just two people looking for a break from the noise. The trail we picked was a narrow one, half forgotten, with no real signage after the first few miles. The air smelled heavy, like rain-soaked moss and rotting bark. By mid-afternoon, we were both muddy and tired. We were about to turn back when I noticed a faint path breaking off to the right. It was barely visible, just a line of trampled weeds pushing through the ferns. "Let's check it out," I said, brushing a branch aside. Catherine hesitated, eyeing the dark undergrowth. "It's not on the map," she said. But curiosity got the better of us. The trail twisted downhill, overgrown and silent except for our footsteps and the occasional bird call. After maybe 20 minutes, the trees opened into a clearing, perfectly round, surrounded by tall pines that blocked out most of the sky. There was soft grass underfoot and a fallen log by a little stream. It felt untouched, hidden. "This is perfect," Catherine said, smiling for the first time that day. I agreed. It felt strange, but beautiful, like we weren't supposed to find it, and yet it was waiting for us. We set up camp, cooked a small meal on our portable stove, and talked until the light faded. By the time the woods turned blue with twilight, the world had gone still. The frogs, the crickets, even the wind. Everything had stopped. It was so quiet that our breathing sounded too loud. When we crawled into our tent, I remember thinking about how thick the air felt. The ground was damp, and I could smell the earthy rot beneath us. Catherine fell asleep quickly, but I lay there listening. I could hear something faint, like the creak of old wood, distant but rhythmic. I told myself it was just trees swaying. Eventually, I drifted off too. Sometime after midnight, Catherine shook my shoulder. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you hear that?" At first, I thought it was rain, soft and irregular. Then I realized it wasn't water, it was voices. Low, scattered murmurs drifting from the trees around us. Dozens of them, maybe more. My heart started pounding. We stayed completely still, listening. Then I saw light, tiny pinpoints flickering through the woods. Lanterns, at least 10 of them, moving slowly in a wide circle around our camp. The lights were old-fashioned, warm yellow glows, swaying as if carried by hand. Catherine's fingers dug into my arm. "Who are they?" She breathed. I didn't answer. The lights moved in unison, keeping their distance, circling us so precisely it didn't seem random. I wanted to yell, but something in me knew not to. We just watched, barely breathing, as the circle tightened slightly, the whispering rising like wind in leaves. Then one of the lights stopped. The circle broke. I don't remember deciding to run. We just grabbed each other and bolted into the dark, leaving everything behind. The tent, our bags, everything. I could feel branches cutting my face, hear Catherine sobbing behind me. The whispering didn't follow. The lights didn't move. When we finally reached the main trail, we didn't stop until we saw the faint orange of dawn breaking through the trees. We spent the rest of the night in the car, shaking and silent. In the morning, we told each other it must have been locals, maybe a group of campers, or kids playing some ritualistic prank. It was easier to believe that than the feeling I couldn't shake, that they hadn't been surprised to see us. They'd been waiting. We went back the next day. It sounds stupid, I know, but we had to. Our wallets, phones, everything we owned was still in that tent. And maybe, if we saw the place in daylight, it would all make sense. The drive back was quiet. The road up the ridge was slick from rain, and fog hung low over the hollows, curling like smoke through the trees. Every now and then, Catherine would reach for my hand, squeeze it, and let go again. Neither of us said what we were thinking. When we reached the trailhead, it looked exactly the same. Empty, forgotten, like no one had walked it in years. We followed the same route, through mud and ferns, past a fallen oak that I remembered stepping over. But when we reached the clearing, something was wrong. The tent was gone. Not collapsed, not torn down, just gone. No footprints, no trash, no gear. Only a wide, perfect circle in the grass, black and dead. The ground inside was scorched, brittle under our boots. Catherine knelt, running her fingers through the ash. "It's burnt," she said softly. But there was no smell of smoke, no charred wood, nothing else touched by fire. Just that one circle, as if the earth itself had been erased. I walked to the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line. The woods were silent again, that same heavy stillness pressing in. Then I noticed something. Along the bark of the trees surrounding the clearing were faint marks, lines, circles, symbols I didn't recognize, carved deep and dark with age. Some had moss growing inside them. It wasn't new. Whatever happened here had happened long before we arrived. Catherine whispered, "Let's go." We left everything as it was and hiked back fast. The whole time I felt like we were being watched, not chased, not followed, just observed. The same quiet awareness I'd felt that first night. That evening, after we got home, I tried to find any record of a town or campsite near where we'd been. Nothing. The area wasn't listed on any map newer than the 1960s. I found one old reference on a hiking forum, someone mentioning an old settlement clearing past mile marker 12, but the post had no replies and was years old. Catherine refused to talk about it after that. She deleted every photo from the trip. She doesn't hike anymore. Sometimes, when she's half asleep, she mumbles about the whispering, how it sounded like a prayer, or names being spoken over and over. It's been 3 years. I still think about that clearing more than I should, about the way those lanterns moved, slow and deliberate, as if tracing something on the ground. I wonder what was inside that circle before we came. Sometimes I dream about it. I see the lights again, turning, and in the center where the tent used to be, I see 2 shadows sitting still, hand in hand. The thing that keeps me awake isn't the fear that we were being hunted. It's the thought that maybe, when we ran, we interrupted something that wasn't finished. And maybe, somewhere deep in those woods, they're still walking that circle, still waiting for us to come back. I still can't drive through that part of the Blue Ridge without feeling my stomach twist. The trees seem to lean closer there, darker than they should be, as if they remember what happened. It's been 6 years since that night, but I can still hear the sound of those 3 knocks. We were a group of 5, me, my college roommate Tyler, his cousin Shane, and 2 girls we'd met through mutual friends, Lila and Casey. We were all in our mid-20s, and we'd been talking for months about taking a weekend camping trip somewhere untouched. Tyler was obsessed with old maps, and found this forgotten trail off Route 220, about 2 miles from an abandoned mine entrance. He said there was a cave nearby that used to connect to the mine shafts before they were sealed. We parked near an old forestry gate, the metal eaten with rust, and hiked for nearly 3 hours. By the time we reached the clearing, fog had rolled in from the valley below. The cave mouth yawned at the base of a limestone ridge, black, wet, and silent. It smelled faintly of earth and something sour, like rotting leaves. We set up camp about 30 yards from it. Tyler said the acoustics inside would be amazing if we shouted. Shane joked about exploring it after dark. Nobody laughed much at that. That evening, we built a fire and passed around a bottle of bourbon. The flames cast long shadows across the clearing, flickering against the mouth of the cave. I remember how the night grew quieter as it got colder. No wind, no crickets, just the soft hiss of burning wood and the occasional snap from the fire. Even our voices seemed to fade quickly, as if the air itself swallowed them. Around midnight, the bourbon was mostly gone, and we were half dozing by the fire when the first knock came. It was dull and hollow, like someone tapping on a wooden door deep underground. Then came 2 more, 3 knocks, then silence. Shane looked up and said, "That's just rock settling, happens all the time." But I could tell he didn't believe it. None of us did. The sound had been too clean, too deliberate, like someone or something wanted us to know it was there. A few minutes passed. Lila whispered, "Did it echo?" Tyler frowned. "No, echoes repeat. That was 3 distinct hits." We sat in tense silence, waiting. Then Shane, trying to lighten the mood, grabbed a stick and walked toward the cave entrance. "If there's a minor ghost in there," he said, "let's give him a little rhythm." He banged the stick against a rock near the mouth of the cave, 3 sharp knocks. We waited. Nothing. Lila exhaled. "See? Probably just knock, knock, knock." This time, the sound didn't come from the cave. It came from behind us. The hairs on my neck stood straight up. We all turned at once, flashlights slicing through the fog. Nothing. Just the dense wall of trees, black silhouettes pressed close. Shane whispered, "Tyler, was that you?" Tyler's light shook slightly. "I'm right here." No one said anything after that. We just stood there, listening to the silence closing around us. The forest felt wrong. Even the air seemed thicker, colder. Eventually, we went back to the fire, pretending it was nothing. Lila crawled into her tent early, refusing to look at the cave again. Tyler stayed up, staring into the dark like he was waiting for something else to happen. I didn't sleep much that night. Every few minutes I thought I heard small noises. Faint crunching in the leaves, soft scraping near the rocks, maybe even breathing. Once, I thought I saw a light flicker deep in the cave, but it vanished when I blinked. By morning, the fog had swallowed the valley completely. Our gear was damp, the air thick and gray. Nobody talked about what happened. But when I looked toward the cave, I saw something on the rock wall that hadn't been there before. 3 parallel scratches, deep and fresh, running down the limestone. They looked like claw marks, but they were perfectly spaced, almost like fingers. We stayed another night. I wish we hadn't. Shane insisted the knocks were just echoes from falling stones. Tyler didn't argue, but I could see the tension in his face. He kept glancing toward the cave whenever the wind shifted. I felt it too. That unease that never quite left, like the forest was holding its breath around us. Around dusk, the fog thickened again, and a slow drizzle began. It carried the smell of wet soil and smoke. Lila said she wanted to leave in the morning, and I agreed. Tyler didn't respond. He'd been pacing near the cave for hours, tracing his fingers along the fresh scratches. At one point, he said quietly, "They're in sets of 3. "What?" I asked. He looked at me. 3 scratches, 3 knocks. I didn't know what to say. There was something about the way he said it. Not frightened, just hollow. Like he was realizing something he couldn't explain. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every sound from the woods seemed closer than it should have been. Even the rain dripping from the trees had rhythm. 3 drops, pause, 3 drops again. My mind started twisting everything into patterns. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of shuffling near the cave. It was faint but steady, footsteps on wet stone. I whispered, "Tyler?" but no one answered. The fire had burned low, throwing dim orange light across the clearing. I saw movement near the cave mouth, a shadow that wasn't shaped like any of us. Tall, thin, and motionless. I blinked, and it was gone. Then came the knocking again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it came from inside one of the tents. Casey screamed. Tyler jumped out of his tent and unzipped it open. Empty. But the knocking didn't stop. It moved, to the ground beneath us. Then the cave wall. Then somewhere deeper, echoing under the earth, like it was circling us. We grabbed our things and ran. No words, no plan. The forest was slick with rain, branches slapping our faces, our flashlights bouncing off wet bark. At one point, I heard someone fall behind me, but when I turned, everyone was there. Or at least, I thought they were. We didn't stop running until we reached the truck. We didn't even pack up the tents. We just drove. When the sun came up hours later, we finally pulled over near a gas station outside Hot Springs. That's when we realized Tyler wasn't with us. We went back with the search team 2 days later. His gear was still there. His flashlight lay near the cave entrance, pointing inward. They never found him. The official report said, "Possible fall into unstable terrain." But I know what I heard that night. Those knocks weren't random, they were deliberate. And when the rescuers shouted his name into the cave, the echo that came back wasn't his voice. It was 3 hollow thuds from somewhere deep underground. Sometimes, when I camp alone now, I still hear it faintly, knock, 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 in the quiet between gusts of wind or dripping water. Always 3. And when it happens, I don't knock back, not anymore. I grew up in Kentucky, about an hour from a place locals call Carrion Ridge, a stretch of Appalachian backcountry that used to be a coal town until the mines shut down in the late 60s. My brother Daniel and I had spent a lot of summers hiking the trails around there, mostly for the quiet. After our father died last winter, we decided to camp near the ridge again, like we used to when we were kids. I told myself it'd be good for both of us. We got there late in the afternoon. The air smelled like wet earth and rust. The trail was slick with mud, and I could see our breath in the air though it was early October. What was left of the town sat about a mile down the hill. Mostly collapsed houses and a church with its steeple broken in half. We pitched our tent higher up, near the tree line, where we could look down over the hollow and see the old rooftops between the pines. Daniel built the fire while I unpacked the sleeping bags. The woods were so quiet it felt like the air had weight. Every now and then we'd hear something. A branch breaking, a bird starting up, then stopping too soon. As dusk settled, the fog started rolling in from the hollow, slow and heavy, like smoke from an invisible fire. The smell of coal dust still hung in the dirt, faint, but there. We ate canned chili and talked about Mom. She'd been having a hard time since Dad's heart attack. Daniel said she'd been forgetting things lately, leaving the stove on, mixing up names. He looked smaller somehow, sitting there across from me. I hadn't realized how much the last year had hollowed him out. That's when he said it. "Do you see that?" His voice was low, like he didn't want to scare it away, whatever it was. I turned, following his eyes toward the edge of the trees, about 30 feet from the fire. The light was thin and orange, barely cutting through the fog. "What?" I said. "There's a man standing there." I stared into the dark. Nothing. Just the shapes of trees, the shifting fog. Daniel didn't look away. He was watching the fire, just now. "You probably saw a tree trunk or something." He didn't argue, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. He sat back down, closer to the flames, and didn't speak for a while. By full dark, the woods had gone completely still. No crickets, no wind, just the slow crackle of the fire. We turned in early, both of us half awake, half listening to the woods. I remember waking up sometime after midnight. A soft patter of rain had started, tapping against the tent. Daniel was breathing steadily next to me. When I stepped out to relieve myself, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. The fire had died down to glowing embers, but the mud around it looked disturbed. Fresh, like someone had walked there recently. I clicked on my flashlight and followed the impressions. They led from the woods straight toward our tent. There were 2 prints, clear as day, boots, deep tread, fresh mud, still wet, and they stopped, right at the spot where Daniel had been sleeping. I froze there, the rain coming down harder, listening for anything, breathing, movement, the snap of a twig, but there was nothing. Just the hiss of rain hitting the fire pit. When I looked back toward the trees, I thought I saw something. Not movement exactly, but the faintest shape between 2 trunks, like a darker patch in the dark. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't wake Daniel. I told myself it was runoff from the hill, that the prints weren't what they looked like. But the rest of the night I lay awake listening to the rain and the wind moving through the hollow, waiting for the sound of footsteps that never came. By morning, the prints were washed away, but the image of them stayed sharp in my mind. We broke camp early. Daniel was quiet, distracted. I told him about the footprints, half expecting him to laugh, but he didn't. He just looked toward the tree line and said, "I told you I saw someone." We decided to hike down into the hollow before heading home. The path curved through dripping ferns and black mud until we reached what was left of the old mining town. The place looked swallowed by the earth, roofs collapsed under moss, walls leaning at impossible angles. There was a smell, mold, burnt wood, and something else underneath like wet metal. We walked past what used to be the church. Its doors were gone, but the bell was still there, lying sideways in the mud. The silence was so complete it felt unnatural, like the sound had been scraped out of the air. Daniel wandered into one of the old houses, or what was left of it. The inside was scattered with broken glass and furniture half buried in dirt. "Check this out," he said, holding up a photo frame. It was covered in grime, the picture faded. A family of 4 standing in front of what looked like this very same house. The father's face was scratched out with something sharp. "That's messed up," I muttered. We left the photo where it was and went deeper into the house. There was a back room with the ceiling caved in. I noticed a single pair of boots sitting near the door, caked in old mud, but the shape was familiar. Daniel crouched beside them. "Think someone's been here?" I didn't answer. My stomach had started to twist. The size, the tread, they looked just like the prints from last night. We didn't stay long after that. The hike back up felt endless, the trail steeper than I remembered. The fog followed us the whole way, thick and clinging. That night, after we got home, Daniel couldn't sleep. He said he kept seeing a shape standing outside our tent whenever he closed his eyes. I tried to joke it off, but the truth was, I hadn't been sleeping either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those footprints, wet, heavy, stopping right beside him. A few days later, I called him. No answer. I figured he was just trying to reset after the trip. But by the next morning, Mom called me crying. Daniel hadn't come home from work. They found his truck parked near the ridge trailhead, keys still in the ignition. Search teams combed the area for a week. They found nothing. No sign of him, no tracks, no struggle. Just a stretch of mud leading down toward the hollow. I went back once, a few months later. Couldn't help myself. The trail was frozen over by then, the trees bare. The old town looked smaller, almost swallowed by snow. I stood where our campfire had been, the air so still it hurt my ears. The ground was solid, but I could still picture those prints, how fresh they looked, how deliberate. I kept looking at the tree line, half expecting to see a man standing there, just watching. There was nothing, of course. There never is. But sometimes, when I think about that night, about how the prince stopped right beside my brother, I wonder if maybe he hadn't been dreaming. Maybe the man he saw never left. And sometimes when the house goes quiet and I hear the faintest sound of dripping water or the shuffle of boots in mud that isn't there, I find myself listening, the way you do when you know someone's near but you can't see them. I don't go camping anymore, not anywhere near Carrion Ridge. Every summer, my dad and I drove deep into the Appalachians to a place called Dry Hollow Creek. It wasn't on any map, just a small clearing beside a narrow stream, surrounded by a ring of pines so dense they always looked like they were holding their breath. It became our ritual. He'd fish, I'd set up camp, and we'd sit by the fire telling stories about ghosts and drifters that supposedly wandered the mountains. It was our way of being close, without ever having to talk about real things, like Mom leaving or how quiet the house had become after. That last trip was in late August. The forest was humid, heavy with the smell of wet bark and rot. I remember how the mist hung low over the creek, making everything look a little blurry. Dad was quieter than usual. He'd been losing weight, his hands trembling sometimes when he tied fishing knots. When I asked if he was okay, he just said, "Mountain air'll fix me up." The first night passed quietly. Crickets, running water, the occasional snap of a branch too close for comfort. But it was the second morning that changed everything. I woke up to the sound of my dad unzipping the tent. The sun hadn't risen fully, just that thin gray light seeping through the trees. He stood there, half out of the tent, staring into the woods. "What's wrong?" I whispered. He didn't answer at first. Then, without looking back, he said, "I saw someone." The way he said it, flat, certain, made me sit up. "Where?" "By the tree line, watching." He pointed toward the pines, where fog was curling around the trunks like smoke. Tall fella, pale face, just stood there. We walked the perimeter of the clearing, but found nothing. Just animal tracks and damp leaves. Still, I could tell it bothered him. He kept glancing toward the woods all day, squinting into the shadows. That night, he built the fire bigger than usual. He said it was for warmth, but it felt like a barrier. The forest beyond the glow looked endless. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. When I woke again, it was pitch dark except for the dull orange of the dying fire. I could hear something outside, soft crunches, like careful footsteps in the leaves. Then my dad's voice, barely above a whisper, "Don't move." My heart hammered against my ribs. He was lying beside me, his hand clutching mine. I could see his silhouette, tense, staring toward the tent's mesh door. Through the thin fabric, lit faintly by the dying fire, I saw it too. A face, pale, dirty, still. It wasn't moving, just there, pressed close enough that I could see the outline of its cheekbone, the wet gleam of its eyes. Dad didn't make a sound. Neither did I. After what felt like forever, the fire hissed out completely, and the face melted into the darkness. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. The fire pit was cold. Dad was gone. I called for him until my voice cracked. His fishing rod was gone, but his pack and jacket were still there. The forest around the clearing was silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just that heavy, wet stillness that makes your stomach twist. I followed the creek, thinking maybe he'd gone to wash up or check his traps. I walked for nearly an hour before I realized I didn't recognize the terrain anymore. The stream had split somewhere behind me, and I'd taken the wrong branch. That's when I found the clearing. It was small, maybe 20 feet wide, and scattered with the remnants of old campfires, blackened stones, half-buried tin cans, and bits of tarp half swallowed by moss. But the thing that stopped me was the smell. It was faint at first, like something spoiled, old and sweet, but stronger near a collapsed tent at the far edge. Its fabric was shredded, torn open down one side. Inside were blankets, a rusted lantern, and an old photo stuck to the inner wall by a nail. I pulled it free. It was a picture of a man and a boy, maybe 10 years old, sitting by a campfire. The man looked vaguely familiar. Same type of flannel my dad wore, same spot even. Dry Hollow Creek. But the photo was faded, the colors leached out by time. On the back, written in shaky pen, was a year, 1993. That couldn't be right. I wasn't even born then. I turned around, suddenly aware of how far I'd wandered, and saw the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. Except there wasn't a breeze. I don't remember running, just the sound of my boots slapping mud and the rasp of my breathing echoing through the holler. When I got back to our camp, the tent was half collapsed. My dad's knife lay near the fire pit. He came back just before dusk. His clothes were damp, his face pale. He didn't say where he'd gone, just stared into the fire, mumbling that we were leaving at first light. That night he didn't sleep. Neither did I. Every so often I heard twigs snapping beyond the light. Once, I swear I saw movement near the tree line again, that same faint shape, tall and unmoving. Sometime before dawn I heard him whisper almost to himself, "It's the same place. God, it's the same damn place." He didn't explain what he meant. We packed up before sunrise and we never went back. Years later, after he died, I was going through his things. Old maps, photos, his fishing license. At the bottom of the box was a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. Father and son, missing near Dry Hollow Creek, 1993. Below, it was the same photo I'd found in that ruined tent, the man and the boy, sitting by the fire. No remains were ever found. Now, whenever I drive through the Appalachians and see fog settling low between the ridges, I think about that face, how still it was, how close. And sometimes, when the woods go quiet and the air smells like rain and ash, I catch myself staring into the tree line, wondering if maybe my dad hadn't seen a stranger at all. Maybe he'd seen something he recognized, something waiting. I'd always trusted my cousin Ray when it came to the outdoors. He'd grown up in rural Kentucky, the kind of guy who could name trees by the smell of their bark. I wasn't built for the woods, I was the city cousin, but when he invited me to join him for a 2-day hike along a quiet, disused part of the Appalachian Trail near Harlan County, I said yes. I thought it'd be a way to clear my head. The morning we started, fog clung low in the valleys like something alive. The trees were dripping from last night's rain, the air thick with that earthy scent of wet bark and moss. The path was narrow, half swallowed by weeds, the wooden markers leaning and faded. I remember the way the silence pressed in, not peaceful, but heavy, like the whole mountain was listening. By late afternoon, we'd been hiking for hours without seeing a single person. When we came around a bend in the trail, Ray stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into him. There was a clearing ahead, small, surrounded by dark hemlocks, and right in the middle of it sat a fully set-up campsite. It looked recent. A green tent pitched neatly, a small fire pit ringed with rocks, and a sleeping bag laid out beside a backpack. There were granola wrappers, a half-empty water bottle, even a can of beans still unopened. But no one was around. Someone must have stepped off to use the woods, I said, though even as I said it, something felt wrong. We waited. 10 minutes passed, then 30, an hour. The light began to dim, the fog thickening again between the trees. Ray called out a couple of times, but no answer, no rustling, no movement. The strangest part was how still everything was. No birds, no wind, just the low hiss of the fire that had long gone out. At some point, Ray crouched near the backpack and unzipped it. "Maybe there's ID," he said. Inside were clothes, neatly folded, and a small black notebook. The pages were damp, the handwriting cramped and uneven. I could make out parts of it. "He comes at night. Don't make noise." Followed me again near the ridge. I told him to put it back. My stomach had started to knot. There was a smell in the air, faint but sharp, like wet iron and mildew. We talked about moving on, but it was getting too dark to hike safely. Against my better judgment, Ray said we could just camp nearby, not in their spot, but a little down the slope. "If they come back, we'll hear them," he said. So we set up our own tent maybe 30 yards away, close enough to see the shape of the other camp through the trees. I couldn't eat. I just kept glancing over at that lonely green tent, wondering where its owner had gone. By the time night came fully down, fog had swallowed the clearing. Everything beyond a few feet was gray soup. We sat quietly, listening to the forest. Every sound, every twig snap, made my heart kick. Around 9 p.m., Ray mumbled that he was turning in. I stayed up a while, longer, flashlight on, staring toward the other tent. It was nothing but a darker shadow now, just a faint outline in the mist. Then, maybe an hour later, I heard something. It wasn't movement, not footsteps, not rustling, but a voice, a whisper. So faint I thought I imagined it. It came from the direction of the other tent. I froze, my breath caught, then, clear this time, low, right against the air. "You shouldn't have touched my things." I didn't move. I just sat there, every nerve screaming. The whisper didn't come again. But I could feel something watching, from that tent, or behind it, or maybe closer. When I finally woke Ray, the words barely came out. He said I must have been dreaming. But he didn't sound convinced. We didn't sleep much after that. At first light, the fog still hadn't lifted. It just hung there, cold and sour. Neither of us said much. We both just wanted to pack up and leave. But when we turned toward the other campsite, something had changed. The tent was gone. Not packed, not collapsed, gone. Everything, the sleeping bag, the food, the backpack, all gone, leaving behind a dark rectangle of flattened grass. I thought maybe it had been a dream, that maybe it hadn't even been there. But then Ray pointed to the ground near where the fire pit had been. There were footprints, dozens of them, bare, human prints, all facing different directions, overlapping, as if several people had circled there in the night. They weren't fresh, though. The edges were soft, rain-worn, days old. Ray cursed under his breath. He said we should head back to the truck and call it in. Maybe let a ranger know someone was out here. But I could tell he didn't believe his own words. We started back down the trail, but something was off. The markers looked different. The path twisted in a way I didn't remember. Every tree felt familiar and wrong at the same time. I started to feel dizzy, like we were walking in circles. After an hour, we came across something else, a wooden sign half buried in mud. I wiped it off. It said, Pine Hollow Camp, closed since 1997. I looked at Ray. He looked pale. That wasn't the name of the section we were supposed to be in. We hadn't gone that far. A while later, we found the tent again. Same one, green, slightly torn near the zipper. It sat there in another clearing, as if waiting for us. But this time, the flap was open. Inside was the same backpack, the same notebook, the same clothes. And there was something new, a photograph, lying face down. I picked it up. It was a Polaroid of two men. One of them was Ray. The other looked like me. We were standing next to that very tent, same clearing, same fog. My throat went dry. "This isn't funny," I said. Ray swore he'd never seen it before. He looked shaken, almost angry, like he didn't want to look at it anymore. He tossed it into the mud and started to leave. That's when I noticed the smell. Again, that same metallic dampness, only stronger. I turned back toward the tent and saw the dark patch on the inside floor. It wasn't mud. I don't remember leaving that clearing. I just remember stumbling after Ray until we reached the truck, the whole world buzzing in my ears. We didn't talk on the drive back. When we got to his place, Ray said he needed a drink and didn't want to ever speak about it again. I didn't argue. That was 3 years ago. Ray's gone now. Disappeared last spring during another hike, not far from Harlan County. The rangers said it looked like he'd set up camp and then just walked off. Left everything behind. Sometimes I still wake up to that whisper, so close I can feel the breath of it. You shouldn't have touched my things. I've stopped hiking since then, but every now and then when fog settles low and heavy outside my window, I swear I can see a tent, green, faint, and waiting. And I can't help but wonder if someone else is out there now, finding what we found. I was in my 3rd week of fieldwork when I found the first one. I'd been hiking a section of the Pisgah National Forest, a stretch few people ever wander into. My project was simple enough. Studying migration patterns of local mammals by tracking scat and camera traps. The kind of work that keeps you alone for days, deep in the tree line, surrounded by mist and mud. That morning, the fog hadn't lifted. The forest was a pale gray wall, every sound muffled, every step swallowed by wet leaves. I'd been following an old game trail, thin and overgrown, when I noticed something swinging just ahead. At first, I thought it was a bird's nest. Then I saw the face. It was carved crudely into a chunk of wood. Hollow eyes, a long nose, a slit for a mouth. Someone had scratched lines across it like scars. The figure hung by a thin rope, turning slowly in the breeze. I looked around. There were more. Dozens of them, dangling from the trees like fruit. Each one different, some with crooked grins, some without eyes at all. All of them faced down toward the path, like they were watching anyone who passed beneath. It felt wrong, not just eerie, intentional. I took a few photos for documentation, more out of habit than courage. My radio crackled weakly in my pack, but I couldn't raise anyone. The ridge blocked the signal, same as usual. I remember thinking I'd make camp a few miles further, get out of that valley before dark. By the time I stopped hiking, the sun was already gone. The woods dimmed to that heavy blue that makes everything feel colder. I pitched my tent in a clearing near a creek, boiled some water. and tried not to think about those faces. The night came down fast. I could hear the usual noises, owls, frogs, something big moving far off. But around midnight, the sounds changed. It started with a snap. Not close, but high, like a branch breaking above the tent. Then another. I figured it might be a bear climbing, or maybe wind damage. But the air was still. I turned off my lantern and just listened. The forest held its breath. Then something fell, light but sudden, landing right on top of my sleeping bag. I froze. My first thought was a pine cone. I reached out, half asleep, and my fingers touched something carved. I switched on my headlamp. It was one of the faces. Smaller than the others, but unmistakable. The same hollow eyes, the same rope tied tight around its top. It had fresh cuts in the wood, like it had been carved recently. I just stared at it, my mouth dry, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it fell from a tree. Maybe someone had hung them higher than I noticed. But my tent was under an open patch. No trees directly above. I placed the carving outside and zipped up the tent, forcing myself to believe I was overreacting. Sleep came in fragments, broken by noises I couldn't identify. At one point, I thought I heard whispering, or maybe leaves shifting. When dawn came, the woods were still. But the carving I'd tossed outside was gone. I broke camp at first light, trying to shake the unease. I told myself I'd collect the cameras near the ridge and then head back early. The forest looked different in daylight, but not better. As I walked, I noticed marks on the trees I hadn't seen before. Shallow cuts, 3 lines each, almost like tally marks. They ran along the trail every few yards. When I reached the ridge, I found my first camera trap torn down. The metal casing was cracked, lens smashed. No animal could have done that neatly. It was pried open, almost carefully. The SD card was missing. I checked the second camera, same thing. By the third, I stopped pretending it was wildlife. There were boot prints, not mine, pressed deep into the mud near the tree. The heels were uneven, worn. Whoever it was, they'd been watching the trail too. I decided to pack up and leave the forest altogether. I didn't even finish my survey. It took hours to backtrack. Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't retracing my own steps anymore. The trail twisted in ways I didn't remember. Small forks that hadn't been there before. I'd hiked this area enough to know my sense of direction was good, but everything felt shifted. When the fog rolled in again, it felt like the woods were closing in around me. Then I saw them. More wooden figures, dozens, maybe hundreds this time, hanging thicker than before, crowding the path. Some were cracked, blackened by rain, their faces warped. The air smelled like rot and pine sap. One of them had something carved into the forehead. Initials. MJ. My chest went cold. Those were my initials. I stopped walking for a long time. The woods were utterly silent. No birds, no wind, just the faint sound of rope creaking overhead. I don't remember taking the next few steps, only that I eventually stumbled into an old fire ring. Stones blackened, ashes damp. Someone had camped there recently. Inside the ring was a burned pile of wood fragments, and in the center something pale that wasn't wood. I didn't look too closely. I just ran. The trail spit me out near an old ranger road by dusk. When I finally reached my truck, I locked the doors and sat there shaking. My phone had 2 missed messages from my research partner asking if I'd found the marked trail. I didn't reply. Back at base, I turned in my notes, deleted the photos, and filed the week as incomplete due to equipment failure. That night, as I unpacked, I found something at the bottom of my pack. It was the same wooden carving that had fallen onto my sleeping bag. The rope was still damp. The initials MJ were cut into the back. It's been 6 months since that trip. I don't talk about it much. Most people just think I burned out, left the project because of nerves. Maybe they're right. But sometimes, when I hike alone near home, I still hear faint creaking in the branches above me. I've stopped camping under trees, and I haven't carved my name into anything since. I'd been to the Appalachians plenty of times before, but that trip in early October was the first one that ever made me feel small. There were 4 of us, me, Tyler, Jess, and Rob. We'd all gone to college together, now in our 30s, trying to act like those old camping trips meant something more than nostalgia. We drove deep into McDowell County, down a road so narrow the trees nearly touched the truck on both sides. The map called it Hemlock Road, but it hadn't been maintained in decades. The gravel had given way to mud, and the forest swallowed what little sunlight was left. We found a clearing just off a slope where an old logging road split and ended in a wide dirt patch. There was a fire pit there, circular, half-buried stones blackened with soot. It looked old, older than the road itself. Someone had built it carefully, with big flat river stones, but it hadn't been used in years. Tyler said it was perfect. Jess wrinkled her nose. "Smells like something died out here." She wasn't wrong. The air was heavy with that wet, rotten smell, leaves and mud, and something deeper, like burned plastic. We pitched tents before the rain started. I remember the sound of it, soft and steady, tapping on nylon while the forest went dark. No wind, no crickets, just rain and that distant hum of the valley, like a low breath that never stopped. By night, we got a small fire going. We cooked hot dogs, told the usual stories, laughed at old jokes. Everything felt fine until maybe around midnight, when the laughter died down and the silence pressed in. I remember how the forest felt alive then. Every twig snap sounded too close, every gust too deliberate. I told myself it was just the woods settling. Then came the smell of smoke, not ours, but sharper, acrid. Tyler noticed it first. "Hey, is someone else out here?" he said, squinting past the glow of our own fire. About 50 feet away, down where the old logging road curved out of sight, there was another glow. Flickering. Low and orange. We hadn't seen anyone all day, no vehicles, no voices. The road ended here. We grabbed our flashlights and walked over, half curious, half annoyed someone else had camped so close. The closer we got, the clearer the smell became, not wood smoke, but something chemical. When we reached the pit, my stomach twisted. It was the same circle of stones. The same pit. Someone had rebuilt it into the side of the road like a mirror of ours. And it was burning. Not wood, photographs, hundreds of them, curling and blackening at the edges. I crouched and picked one up before the flames reached it. It was damp, the ink faded. But I could see the image. A campsite. Our campsite. Same tents, same truck, same fire pit. Even the same angle, like the picture had been taken from where I was standing. "Is this a joke?" Rob muttered. "You doing this, man?" Tyler swore he wasn't. Jess just stood back, arms wrapped around herself. The firelight made her look pale. We found more photos around the pit, some half buried in the wet dirt. They were all of campsites, some with different tents, some with none at all, just ash. But every one had that same pit, that same road. The flames hissed out as the rain thickened. We didn't talk much walking back. None of us wanted to say it, but I could feel the thought sitting heavy between us. Whoever had lit that fire had been watching us long enough to take those photos. When we got back to camp, our fire was out too. All that was left was smoke. And just at the edge of the trees, a faint shimmer, like a figure stepping back into the dark before I could focus. I didn't tell the others I saw that. I just told them we should leave in the morning, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the photos curling in the flames, and one question looping over and over in my head: who had taken them, and when? I woke to the sound of dripping. Not rain, something closer. The tarp above my tent sagged under the weight of water. It must have poured all night. Everything smelled like mildew and wet ash. I stepped outside, and the forest felt wrong. Heavy. The kind of silence that feels like something waiting to end. Jess was already up, staring down the road. Tyler and Rob were gone. They said they were checking the fire pit again, she said quietly. But that was over an hour ago. I didn't answer. I just grabbed a flashlight and started walking. The road was a stream of mud now, every step sucking my boots deeper. When we reached the pit, the fire was cold, but there was smoke again. Not from the ashes, from under them. Tyler's lighter sat half buried in the wet dirt, his knife beside it, and a new pile of photographs. They were clean, not burned. I picked one up, my hand shaking before I even knew why. It was me, taken from behind, right as I stepped out of my tent that morning. Jess's voice cracked. How could that? I flipped through more. Tyler and Rob near the pit. Jess sitting by the tent. Every picture was taken from a distance, at the angle just off, like someone standing where we weren't looking. Then I noticed something else. In the background of every photo, there was another person, blurred, half hidden. Standing by the trees, always the same height, the same posture, like a shadow that never moved. Jess started crying. We need to go. I didn't argue. We ran back to camp, grabbing what we could. The rain started again, harder this time as we packed up in silence. But when we reached the truck, the driver's door was open. Tyler's seat was wet, his backpack was gone. No tire tracks, no footprints except ours. Just the rain erasing everything faster than we could process it. Jess begged to leave without them. I wanted to wait. We argued until the fog thickened so much I could barely see her face, and then the smell came again. Smoke and plastic. Somewhere down the road the fire was burning. I don't know why I went back. Maybe I thought I'd find them there. Maybe I needed to know. When I reached the pit, it was burning bright again, even through the rain. The photographs were back, more than before. And they weren't old this time, they were new. I could see my face, taken just minutes earlier, walking alone toward the fire. Tyler and Rob, too, in the forest, looking lost, turned the wrong way. The last few photos were blank. Wet. Then, one at the bottom, stuck to the mud. Jess, standing by the truck, staring at something behind her. I ran. When I got back, Jess was gone. The truck was still there, keys on the seat. I don't remember leaving the mountains. I just remember the long drive down the valley roads. Headlights cutting through fog, hands shaking on the wheel. That was 3 years ago. The police searched for months. They never found Tyler, Jess, or Rob. They said the rain probably washed away any evidence. They told me what I saw didn't make sense, that maybe someone had been squatting out there playing tricks. Maybe, but sometimes when I can't sleep I still smell that smoke. And a few months ago a package showed up on my porch. No return address. Inside were photographs, damp, faded, of a campsite. Tents, a truck, a fire pit made of river stones, and me sitting alone beside it, staring into the flames.